I never imagined that the moment my pension left my hands, it would set off a chain of events that would leave me questioning not just my finances, but my sense of trust, family, and self. My name is Margaret Hale, and I am 68 years old. I am a retired school librarian, a widow of nearly a decade, and the kind of woman who has spent a lifetime organizing other people's chaos while quietly holding her own life together in careful order. My apartment is modest, filled with books, memories, and the faint scent of lavender from a candle I light every evening, a ritual I have practiced since my husband passed. Everything in my life has a place. Everything, including my heart, was carefully budgeted and accounted for until my daughter Elaine arrived one crisp autumn afternoon with that familiar look of urgency in her eyes. Elaine has always been impulsive. It's not an insult, it's her nature. She inherited my eyes, wide and observant, but she never inherited my caution. Where I think and plan, she acts. Where I hesitate, she leaps. At 34, she was beautiful in a way that demanded attention, confident, self-assured, and almost recklessly alive. She has always been a whirlwind in my otherwise orderly existence, and I have always loved her fiercely, even when I questioned her choices. But I had never considered that one choice could reach across continents, drain my bank account, and leave me alone with an icy silence in my kitchen. The day she arrived, she carried a suitcase that was too large for her small frame. Her hair tumbled in waves over her shoulders, and her eyes sparkled with excitement, or was it desperation? She smiled, and it was the smile that had once lit up my kitchen when she was 5 and had scraped her knee on the playground. The same smile that made me forgive her every misstep over the years. That smile, I realized in that moment, would be the reason I made the decision I would later regret. "Mom," she said, out of breath, "I need your help. Just this once." Those words, "just this once," have a way of echoing in a parent's mind. They feel innocent, temporary, and urgent all at once. I should have asked more questions. I should have taken a moment to assess my finances, my pantry, my obligations. But instead, I nodded. I smiled back, and I waited for the storm I hadn't yet seen. She told me about an opportunity, spontaneous and thrilling, a group trip across Europe, something she described as life-changing. She painted a picture of cobblestone streets, golden sunsets over the Mediterranean, cafes filled with laughter and music. Her words were vivid, intoxicating. She said she needed to go now, before responsibilities caught her in their relentless grip. I listened, heart both aching and full, knowing that this was a plea, a demand, a wish all bundled into one. I asked her how much she needed. She hesitated. That hesitation was the first warning I should have heeded. When she finally whispered the figure, my chest tightened. The number was staggering. It was nearly my entire pension for the month. Every carefully accounted dollar, intended for rent, food, medication, and small comforts, gone with a keystroke and a promise. My pulse quickened as I stared at her, and for a moment, I felt a hollow emptiness open inside me, a pit where reason should have been. "I'll pay you back," she said quickly, almost preemptively. "I swear, Mom. I'll pick up extra work when I get back. I promise." I wanted to say no. I wanted to protect myself, my routines, the little security I had built for the last decade. But then she smiled, that irresistible smile, and something inside me folded. I authorized the transfer. I watched the number disappear from my account and into her hands. I felt an unfamiliar sting in my chest, part worry, part pride, part fear I couldn't name. She hugged me, kissed my cheek, whispered, "You're the best mother in the world," and rolled her suitcase out the door, her energy filling the apartment as it emptied me at the same time. That night, I sat in the kitchen staring at my refrigerator, imagining meals I would have to stretch, planning how I would make do, as I always had. The silence of the apartment pressed in around me, heavier than usual. I told myself I could manage. I always had. I had survived worse. And yet, the quiet whispered, a subtle forewarning of the events to come, a sense of unease I could not shake. The days after Elaine left were long and anxious. I rationed carefully, slicing bread thinner, watering down soups, skipping snacks I normally enjoyed. Every transaction, every bite, Every cup of tea was measured. Pride kept me silent. I told no one of the full extent of my worry. Pride and the faint hope that Elaine would call, would check in, would reassure me that this decision, this sacrifice, had meaning. She did not. Instead, she sent photos. Smiling selfies in front of landmarks I only recognized from travel magazines and documentaries. Plates of food so vibrant and abundant that they seemed unreal. Wine glasses raised and toasts I could not taste. Living my best life, one caption read. I tried not to feel resentment, but it seeped in anyway. A quiet, gnawing sense that my sacrifice had been invisible to her, or perhaps worse, taken for granted. A week passed. My neighbor, Ruth, a sharp-tongued widow who had been my friend for 20 years, knocked at my door. She observed me critically, her gaze lingering just long enough to be uncomfortable. You look thin, she said bluntly. Come eat with me. I almost refused. I almost said, I'm fine. But instead, I followed her, drawn to the warmth of her kitchen, the smell of roast chicken and potatoes, the kind of simple comfort I hadn't realized I missed. That night, in her small, cozy apartment, I admitted more than I intended. I spoke of the transfer, the worry, the way my body tensed with each day that passed without a call. Ruth listened without interruption. When I finished, she looked at me with piercing clarity. Margaret, she said finally, love doesn't mean starving. I laughed weakly, but her words settled into my bones. Love doesn't mean starving. Not for my child. Not for anyone. Yet, in that laughter, in that quiet evening, I felt the first tendrils of guilt for what I had done, or perhaps, for what I had allowed to happen. The next morning, I awoke with a dull ache in my head and an uneasy feeling in my stomach. The apartment seemed wrong. Too still, too sterile. I moved to the kitchen to make tea and opened the refrigerator, my hands trembling slightly. That's when I noticed it. The shelves seemed fuller than I remembered. Fresh vegetables, yogurt, cheese, even meat. Items I had not purchased. At first, I thought my eyes deceived me. Memory can be unreliable, I reminded myself. Perhaps I had bought more than I remembered. But the order, the neatness, the sheer volume, it didn't fit. Someone had been here. I checked the locks, the windows, the door. Everything intact. No signs of forced entry. My pulse quickened. That was when the phone rang. It was Elaine. Her voice was light, careless, bright. Mom, I'd just landed. You won't believe how amazing this place is. I wanted to tell her about the fridge. I wanted to ask if she had come back secretly, if this was some elaborate surprise. But instead, I asked cautiously, Elaine, have you been home? She laughed, dismissive, of course not, Mom. I'm halfway across the world. I didn't mention the food. I hung up, my hands still trembling. That night, I barely slept, turning over every scenario in my mind, imagining break-ins, gifts, tricks, and lessons I had missed. Somewhere in the dark, a quiet, insidious thought took root. The refrigerator was not merely full. It was a message. And the story was only beginning. The days that followed Elaine's departure seemed longer than any I had experienced in decades. Each morning, I awoke to the quiet hum of my refrigerator and the muted sunlight spilling across the kitchen floor, and I felt the hollow ache of absence in every corner of my apartment. I had always been a woman who thrived on routine, precise meals, scheduled walks, meticulously arranged books, but now, even the simple act of preparing breakfast felt like a test of endurance. Every slice of bread, every cup of tea, was measured against a ledger only I could see, a ledger that now bore the absence of hundreds of dollars I had transferred to my daughter for what she had promised would be the trip of a lifetime. I told myself over and over again that this was a small price to pay for her happiness. But the quiet whisper in my mind grew louder each day, questioning my judgment. Did she need this trip more than I needed my peace of mind? Had I been foolish to trust her promises? Or worse, had I been selfish in wanting her to prove herself responsible? The questions gnawed at me, and I found solace only in the routines I clung to, the small acts of control I could maintain while the rest of my life seemed suspended. On the fourth day after her departure, I decided to take stock of my dwindling provisions. Opening the refrigerator, my hands grazed the shelves, and a strange feeling of unease settled in my stomach. The light flickered slightly, and for a moment, I thought it was just my imagination. But as I leaned closer, I realized that something was off. Too much food, too neatly arranged, too deliberate. Fresh vegetables, yogurt, cheese, even cuts of meat that I was certain I had not purchased now occupied the shelves. I stepped back, squinting, trying to reconcile my memory with the evidence before me. Someone had been here. Panic rose in my chest. I double-checked the locks on all doors and windows. Everything was intact. No signs of forced entry. My pulse quickened, my hands shook. What could this mean? Had a neighbor, someone I trusted, intervened without asking? Was it a gift? Or a warning? The possibilities collided in my mind, each more unsettling than the last. Then the phone rang. It was Elaine. "Mom." I just landed, she chirped, her voice filled with the careless excitement I had once found so endearing. "You won't believe how amazing this place is." I wanted to ask her if she had returned secretly, if she had left this unexpected bounty as a surprise, but I forced myself to speak cautiously. "Elaine, have you been home?" Her laugh was light, dismissive. "Of course not, Mom. I'm halfway across the world." I didn't mention the fridge. I hung up, staring at the humming appliance as if it had grown eyes and was watching me. That night, I barely slept, turning over every scenario in my mind. A break-in? A prank? A warning? The more I thought, the more I realized that my carefully constructed sense of security had been shattered, not by strangers, but by the unpredictability of life itself, by the very child I had nurtured and trusted. The days stretched on. My anxiety grew into obsession. I began checking the fridge multiple times a day, inspecting every container, every label, trying to find evidence of who or what had stocked it. I even considered calling the police, though the idea seemed absurd. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing had been taken. Everything had simply appeared. And yet, the dread that crept through my apartment each time I approached the kitchen was real and suffocating. 2 weeks later, Elaine returned, without warning, without explanation. I was seated at the kitchen table, quietly sipping tea, when I heard the suitcase wheels clattering against the hardwood floor. The sound was both familiar and jarring, like a drumbeat announcing a storm I had been anticipating but could not prepare for. She walked in, her eyes wide, her face pale, and her hands trembling slightly. "Mom," she whispered, almost breathless, "what did you put in the fridge?" I froze. "What do you mean?" I asked cautiously, my heart thudding in my chest. Without answering, she moved toward the refrigerator, opening it slowly, almost reverently. And then she screamed. It wasn't a startled yelp or a gasp. It was a raw, unfiltered scream, the kind that comes from the deepest, most primal part of a person. I rushed forward, my knees weak, unsure of what I would find. The shelves, once suspiciously full, now revealed their secret, labeled containers, meticulously organized, each marked with dates, names, even notes written in my handwriting. Meals prepared in advance, frozen and cataloged, as if anticipating her return not tomorrow, but in some distant, uncertain future. Elaine stepped back, covering her mouth with trembling hands. This is sick. Why would you do this? Why would you plan for me like this?" Her voice cracked, disbelief and horror mingling in a single note. I stood there stunned. Slowly, the reality of my actions sank in. In my fear of scarcity, my obsession with order, my desire to protect myself from disappointment, I had prepared for a scenario in which she returned empty-handed, or worse, broke and ungrateful. I had become a woman who froze meals, labeled them, and wrote notes to herself about the exact date each should be eaten. I had turned love into control, care into calculation, anticipation into something almost grotesque. Elaine's eyes met mine, wide with shock, hurt, and anger. And in that moment, I realized that somewhere along the line, I had stopped being just a mother. I had become a woman defined by fear and preparation, by the need to control a world that refused to obey. Her scream echoed through the apartment, bouncing off the walls, filling every corner with sound and accusation. I could see the child she once was, the bright, curious girl who had scraped her knees and begged for bandages, distorted by the adult she had become, the adult who now looked at me as if I were a stranger. I didn't mean to, I began, but the words sounded hollow, inadequate. You didn't mean to, she repeated, her voice trembling. Mom, this is insane. You're planning meals for me like I'm incapable of taking care of myself. This isn't love. This is manipulation. This is control. I didn't argue. I couldn't. Because part of me knew she was right. And yet another part, older, quieter, steeped in decades of responsibility and care, knew she was wrong too. I had acted out of love, fear, and exhaustion. I had done what I thought was necessary. But intention, I learned, can never fully excuse impact. That night, Elaine left the apartment without a suitcase, without a hug, without the warmth I had expected. She did not speak another word of farewell. And as the door closed behind her, the weight of what had transpired settled over me like a heavy fog. I was alone again, not with the comforting quiet of routine, but with the suffocating silence of consequences. In the weeks that followed, I ate the meals I had prepared, one by one. Each bite was a reminder of my actions, of my fear, of my love misdirected. I regained my strength, yes, but also a painful clarity. Love, unchecked by understanding, can become a trap, a prison built from the very desire to protect. I could not change what had happened. I could not undo the screams, the betrayal, the shock in her eyes. All I could do was endure, learn, and hope that time, merciless and healing in equal measure, would offer a path toward reconciliation. The apartment felt impossibly quiet after Elaine left, more so than before, as if her absence had hollowed out every corner of the room. It was the kind of silence that presses against the eardrums, lingering in the spaces between each breath. I sat at my kitchen table for hours, staring at the refrigerator door, the faint hum of its motor a constant reminder of the conflict that had erupted in these walls. My carefully orchestrated world, one built on decades of order, preparation, and sacrifice, had unraveled in a single afternoon. I had thought I was protecting my daughter. In reality, I had constructed a fortress that neither of us could enter without fear. In the days that followed, I felt a strange duality within myself. On one hand, I felt the weight of guilt pressing down on me relentlessly. I had never imagined that my careful planning, my desire to ensure she would never go hungry, would be seen as manipulative or controlling. On the other hand, I could not shake the sting of betrayal. Had she really thought so little of me, my intentions, my love, that she could interpret care as something sinister? The mixture of anger, sadness, and confusion created a constant ache in my chest. I tried to return to my routines, to the rituals that had grounded me for years. I took long walks through the neighborhood, past the familiar park where Elaine had learned to ride her bike, and shopped at the same small grocery store that had been my Saturday ritual for decades. Yet everywhere I went, I felt the echo of the argument, her scream reverberating against my ribs, leaving me breathless. I avoided talking to neighbors, afraid that their eyes might judge me, or worse, that they would ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. Even Ruth, my closest friend, I kept at arm's length, fearing her blunt truths. Then came the nights, when the silence of my apartment became unbearable. I found myself standing in front of the refrigerator, as if expecting it to reveal some secret, some explanation that would restore order to the chaos I had created. I opened and closed the door countless times, examining the shelves, the neatly labeled containers, the frozen meals that had once seemed like an act of devotion, but now felt like evidence of my own fear and obsession. Each opening was a confrontation, a mirror showing me how far I had allowed my anxiety to dictate my actions. And yet, in that quiet reflection, I began to see something I had not noticed before. The meals I had prepared were not just acts of control, they were acts of love. Yes, they had been obsessive. Yes, they had been excessive, but they were born from a place of care, of wanting to ensure her survival, her comfort, her nourishment. I realized that my intentions had been pure, even if my methods had been flawed. This recognition did not erase the argument, but it softened its sting, allowing me to breathe again without the constant tension that had gripped me since Elaine's departure. Weeks passed in this rhythm of quiet introspection. I ate the meals I had prepared, one by one, each bite a reminder of both my love and my limitations. I allowed myself small indulgences I had denied before: fresh bread, buttered generously, a slice of cake from the bakery I had once visited with Elaine, even a single glass of wine on the weekends. Slowly, the apartment began to feel like mine again, though the memory of her scream lingered like a shadow in the corners. Then, unexpectedly, Elaine called. Her voice was quieter than I remembered, almost tentative. "Mom," she said, "can we talk?" I felt a surge of hope, tempered by caution. "Of course," I replied. "I've been thinking about you every day." We arranged to meet at a small cafe near my apartment, a neutral space where we could speak without the weight of the apartment's memories. When she arrived, I noticed the subtle changes in her demeanor, the slight hesitation, the careful movements, the guarded tone. She was not the same person who had screamed at the refrigerator, nor was she the child I had once known. She was an adult, shaped by experiences, fears, and her own reflections on our relationship. We sat across from each other in silence for a moment, letting the bustle of the cafe fill the space between us. Then, cautiously, she spoke. "Mom, I was shocked. I didn't understand why you did what you did. It felt like a trap." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Elaine, I understand. I was acting out of fear, not distrust. I wanted to protect you, and in doing so, I overstepped. I am truly sorry that it felt controlling. I never intended to hurt you." Her eyes softened slightly, but the tension remained. "I know you love me, Mom. I've always known that. But sometimes, love can be overwhelming. It can feel like a weight, even when it's meant to lift you up." I listened, absorbing her words, understanding the delicate truth in them. Love is not just about protection. It is about trust, respect, and the willingness to let another person navigate their own life. I realized that in my efforts to care for her, I had temporarily forgotten this fundamental truth. We talked for hours, sharing memories, regrets, and hopes for the future. I told her of my fear during her absence, of the sleepless nights and obsessive planning. She spoke of her own anxieties, her sense of freedom, and the pressures she felt as an adult trying to navigate the world. Slowly, the anger and shock gave way to empathy, understanding, and the cautious beginnings of reconciliation. By the time we left the cafe, the air between us felt lighter. We were not fully healed, not fully reconciled, but the first cracks of repair were visible. We had acknowledged the pain, shared our perspectives, and committed to moving forward with honesty and compassion. It was a fragile start, but a start nonetheless. In the days that followed, we began to rebuild our relationship slowly. Calls, texts, and visits became more frequent, each interaction a step toward restoring trust. I continued to prepare meals, but now with a different mindset, less about control, more about sharing love without expectation. The refrigerator, once a symbol of fear and obsession, became a place of nourishment and care, a testament to our willingness to move beyond past mistakes. Through this process, I learned that love is not always simple, and that intentions, no matter how pure, can be misunderstood. I discovered the importance of communication, empathy, and humility in repairing fractured relationships. Most importantly, I realized that the bonds between a mother and her child, though tested by fear, misunderstanding, and absence, can endure when nurtured with patience, honesty, and unwavering love. After our meeting at the cafe, life did not instantly return to normal. Healing, I quickly realized, is never instantaneous. It is a process, a series of small, deliberate steps taken over days, weeks, and sometimes months. Elaine and I began the slow work of rebuilding trust, a delicate task that required patience, humility, and careful attention to both our words and silences. Our conversations were tentative at first. Simple calls, brief texts, and cautious visits formed the foundation. Each interaction carried the weight of past misunderstandings, but also the promise of a future shaped by mutual respect. I learned to listen more than I spoke, to ask questions not to guide her but to understand her. Elaine, in turn, began to share her experiences abroad, her successes, fears, and even small regrets, and I learned to respond not with judgment, but with empathy. I noticed subtle changes in both of us. She was no longer the impulsive whirlwind who had demanded my pension and screamed at the refrigerator. She had grown more measured, more reflective, yet her vibrant spirit remained. And I, too, had changed. I no longer approached life with the same anxiety-driven meticulousness. My obsessive need for control had softened, replaced by a patient, measured hope that things would unfold as they were meant to. One afternoon, Elaine invited me to her apartment. The invitation was simple, unassuming. "Mom, come for lunch. I want you to see what I've been doing." My heart fluttered with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. I wondered if old tensions would resurface, or if the warmth we had begun to cultivate would be enough to hold the space between us. When I arrived, I was struck by how organized and welcoming her home was. It was a reflection of her, vibrant yet orderly, expressive yet considerate. She led me to the kitchen, where she had prepared a simple lunch. The table was modest but inviting, a mix of fresh vegetables, a roasted chicken, and warm bread. The sight brought a bittersweet smile to my face. I realized that she had learned from our past, adapting lessons from our conflicts into her own life. As we ate, our conversation flowed naturally. We spoke of small things, her work, my health, books we had read. And gradually, we moved into deeper territory, discussing the past, the misunderstandings, and the unspoken fears that had driven our conflict. Elaine spoke of the shock she felt upon seeing the refrigerator, the sense of being infantilized despite being an adult capable of managing her own life. I spoke of my fear of scarcity, of the need to protect her even when it was unnecessary, and of the loneliness that had amplified my anxieties. Through these exchanges, we began to understand one another more fully. The emotional distance that had accumulated over years of separation and miscommunication started to dissolve. I realized that love, while constant, must be flexible. It must adapt to the growth and independence of the one you cherish. Elaine, in turn, recognized that my actions, though flawed in execution, had been rooted in care and fear rather than malice. Weeks turned into months. Our relationship continued to grow stronger, grounded in honesty and mutual respect. I learned to release the tight grip I had held over both my life and my expectations of her. I allowed myself small indulgences I had once denied, dinners with friends, spontaneous walks, reading late into the night. Elaine began inviting me to events, sharing her life openly, and including me in decisions rather than avoiding the tension that had once defined our interactions. One evening, as we sat together in my living room, sipping tea, Elaine reached across the table and took my hand. "Mom," she said softly, "I know things have been complicated, but I want you to know I understand now. I see why you acted the way you did, even if I didn't agree at first." Her words were a balm, a healing acknowledgement of the past. I squeezed her hand, feeling the weight of years of misunderstanding lift slightly from my shoulders. "Elaine," I replied, "I am proud of you, and I am grateful for your forgiveness. I am learning too every day." From that moment, our bond deepened. It was no longer just the bond of mother and child, but a partnership built on mutual respect, understanding, and shared growth. I discovered that reconciliation is not about erasing the past, but integrating it into a new narrative that allows both people to move forward without resentment. We began creating new traditions together, weekly lunches, shared walks, and occasional weekend trips to explore local sites. These activities were small gestures, but they reinforced the trust and affection that had been threatened but not destroyed. Each shared experience became a building block in the foundation of a renewed relationship, a testament to our resilience and capacity for forgiveness. Through this process, I also gained a deeper understanding of myself. I learned to recognize the ways in which fear and anxiety had shaped my actions, and I began addressing them directly. Meditation, journaling, and quiet reflection became part of my daily life. I found joy in simple routines, in the warmth of my apartment, in the knowledge that I was capable of love that was both firm and gentle. Elaine, too, evolved. She learned that independence does not require dismissal of parental guidance, that trust and patience can coexist with freedom and adventure. We discovered that our differences, once sources of conflict, could now serve as complementary strengths. Her spontaneity balanced my caution, my experience tempered her impulsiveness. Together, we created a rhythm that honored both our needs and personalities. By the time a full year had passed since the refrigerator incident, our relationship had transformed profoundly. What had begun as a moment of conflict and misunderstanding had become a journey of growth, self-awareness, and deepened affection. We had learned to navigate the complexities of love, trust, and family with grace and humility, recognizing that mistakes, when addressed openly and compassionately, can serve as catalysts for stronger, more resilient bonds. In the quiet moments, I would sometimes open the refrigerator and smile, not at the neatly labeled containers or the prepared meals, but at what they represented: a lesson learned, a bridge rebuilt, a love reaffirmed. The fridge was no longer a symbol of fear or control. It was a reminder of endurance, patience, and the extraordinary capacity of the human heart to forgive and grow. Through this experience, I came to understand that family is not merely defined by shared blood or proximity, but by the willingness to confront challenges, embrace vulnerability, and nurture connections even in the face of hurt. My daughter and I had faced a trial that could have fractured us permanently. Instead, it had strengthened our bond, teaching us the invaluable lesson that love, when guided by empathy, patience, and honest communication, can weather even the most unexpected storms. The months following our reconciliation were filled with small but meaningful victories, each one reinforcing the bond between Elaine and me. We had learned that true understanding takes time, that forgiveness is a process rather than a single act, and that love can exist in its most authentic form only when tempered by patience, empathy, and humility. The scream at the refrigerator, once a source of shame and fear, had become a symbol of growth, a stark reminder that, even in moments of intense conflict, there exists the potential for transformation. I remember one particular afternoon, a warm spring day, when Elaine invited me to join her on a small excursion. It wasn't an extravagant trip abroad or a spontaneous European adventure, but rather a visit to a local farmer's market, a place she had always loved but rarely had time to explore. We walked side by side, the sunlight dancing across the stalls, illuminating the vibrant colors of fresh produce, flowers, and handmade crafts. As we moved through the crowd, sharing anecdotes and laughter, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. This was a bond rebuilt, a trust renewed, and a relationship transformed not through grand gestures, but through the quiet, persistent work of mutual understanding. Elaine had grown in ways I could never have predicted. She had learned to balance her impulsive nature with reflection, to temper spontaneity with consideration. And I had grown too, learning that love, while instinctive, requires conscious effort to sustain. My obsession with control had softened, replaced by a mindful awareness that the world, and the people we love, cannot be contained or predicted. Together, we had discovered that boundaries are not limitations, but tools for preserving respect, trust, and harmony. One evening, as we returned from another shared adventure, this time a simple picnic in the park, we stopped by my apartment. The refrigerator, once a source of fear and misunderstanding, now stood as a silent witness to our journey. I opened it to place the leftovers from our outing inside, and for a moment I paused, smiling at the simple, ordinary act. Each shelf held containers, not labeled obsessively or cataloged out of fear, but filled with meals prepared in love, shared freely between mother and daughter. The act of opening the fridge no longer elicited anxiety. Instead, it reminded me of resilience, of lessons learned, and of the quiet strength found in forgiveness. Elaine and I began creating new traditions, rituals that reflected our renewed relationship. We cooked together, shared meals, and even embarked on modest trips within our city. Each act, though simple, became a testament to our commitment to understanding, to trust, and to nurturing the bond that had been tested so severely. We learned to communicate with honesty, to voice our fears and desires without judgment, and to listen with genuine attention. These practices, though small, created a foundation of respect and love that neither distance nor misunderstanding could easily shake. Through this process, I gained insight into the complexity of human relationships. I realized that mistakes, even those made with the best intentions, can have far-reaching consequences. The refrigerator incident, in particular, taught me that love, when entangled with fear and control, can be misinterpreted, creating rifts where none need exist. Yet, the very same situation offered the opportunity for reflection, growth, and reconciliation. I learned that acknowledgement of one's flaws, combined with sincere effort to make amends, can bridge divides that once seemed insurmountable. Elaine, too, experienced profound growth. She learned that independence does not require rejection of guidance, that freedom and responsibility coexist, and that trust and patience are not weaknesses, but strengths. Our journey demonstrated that parent-child relationships are not static. They evolve, adapt, and mature, shaped by shared experiences, reflection, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. I also came to understand the importance of self-care and personal boundaries. As a mother, I had spent decades prioritizing the needs of others, often at the expense of my own well-being. The past year taught me that caring for oneself is not selfish, it is necessary. By attending to my own health, emotional needs, and happiness, I became a more present, loving, and patient parent. I discovered that nurturing my own life allowed me to give more authentically, without fear, resentment, or anxiety. Our relationship, once strained by fear, misunderstanding, and the impulsive actions of youth, had transformed into a partnership characterized by mutual respect and love. We had faced the storm together, navigating the turbulent waters of miscommunication, disappointment, and hurt, and emerged with a deeper appreciation for one another. Our connection was no longer defined solely by familial ties, but by a conscious effort to understand, forgive, and grow together. In quiet moments, I would sometimes reflect on the journey that had brought us here. I thought of the day Elaine took my pension for a trip, of the scream at the refrigerator, of the long nights spent in anxiety and self-reflection. Each memory, once tinged with fear or regret, now carried a lesson about trust, love, resilience, and the capacity for human beings to adapt and reconcile. I realized that life, much like a refrigerator stocked with meals, is a mixture of the expected and the unexpected, the prepared and the unplanned. It is in navigating this mixture that we discover our strength, patience, and capacity for forgiveness. The transformation was not instantaneous, nor was it easy. It required courage to face uncomfortable truths, humility to acknowledge mistakes, and persistence to rebuild what had been broken. But in doing so, we created a bond stronger than before, a bond forged not through perfection, but through effort, empathy, and unwavering love. One evening, as Elaine and I sat together on my balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose, she turned to me and said softly, "Mom, I understand now. I see everything you did, even when I didn't agree. Thank you for loving me enough to prepare, to care, and even to worry. I forgive you." Tears welled in my eyes, but they were tears of relief, gratitude, and profound love. "Elaine," I replied, "I forgive you too, for any hurt you felt, for any fear we shared. I am proud of the woman you've become, and I am grateful for the daughter who has taught me as much as I have taught her." In that moment, the past and present coalesced. The scream, the fear, the misunderstanding, all were transformed into wisdom, compassion, and a renewed connection. The refrigerator, once a symbol of anxiety and conflict, now represented nourishment, care, and the enduring power of love. We had come full circle, not to erase the past, but to embrace it, to learn from it, and to allow it to strengthen rather than weaken our bond. I had discovered that love is not simply about protection or sacrifice. It is about trust, respect, understanding, and the willingness to grow together. Elaine had discovered that freedom and independence thrive best when balanced with empathy, gratitude, and recognition of those who care. Our lives, intertwined and evolving, became a testament to the resilience of the human heart. We had faced the storm together and emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected than ever. The lessons learned, the emotions shared, and the forgiveness granted became the foundation of a relationship that would endure, no matter what challenges lay ahead. In the quiet of my apartment, as I opened the refrigerator to prepare dinner, I smiled at the simple act. It was no longer a source of anxiety, fear, or conflict. It was a symbol of endurance, a monument to patience, and a reminder of the extraordinary capacity of love to heal, reconcile, and transform. And as I prepared a meal to share with my daughter, I realized the profound truth. Family is not defined by perfection, by flawless actions, or by the absence of conflict. It is defined by the willingness to confront mistakes, to extend forgiveness, and to nurture the bonds that connect us, even when the path is difficult and uncertain. The story of the pension, the trip, and the refrigerator had become more than a tale of conflict and reconciliation. It was a story of love tested and proven resilient, a story of fear transformed into understanding, and a story of a mother and daughter who, despite the trials of life, discovered the enduring strength of their connection. As I set the table for two, Elaine's laughter floated from the living room, light and unburdened. I looked around, taking in the warm glow of the kitchen, the simple beauty of the moment, and the knowledge that we had arrived at a place of peace. I realized that while the journey had been long and fraught with tension, it had also been rich with lessons, growth, and the reaffirmation of the bond that mattered most. And in that moment, I knew unequivocally that love, though imperfect, challenging, and at times frightening, had triumphed. It had survived fear, miscommunication, and misunderstanding, emerging stronger, wiser, and infinitely more precious than before. We had faced the storm, opened the refrigerator, confronted the past, and chosen to move forward together. And that, I realized with a deep, abiding sense of peace, was the truest measure of love.